HR often has to facilitate meetings, focus groups, workshops, but this wasn't part of our education, so do we really have the skills? Well, a really brief crash course on facilitation is coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on this show we talk about anything related to HR. I encourage you to please subscribe to the show or to the podcast to keep learning from my guests. And today my guest is Robin Parsons. Robin has a background in marketing, actually, and she led marketing groups for large organizations, but she made a switch to facilitation about 10 years ago. She also teaches facilitation for ICA Associates, and often actually has HR professionals in her courses. So I figured she's going to have some insight into facilitation skills for HR. Hello, Robin. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. I actually learned whatever I know about facilitation from your partner, Dave Robertson.
Like,
yeah. Shout out to Dave. All right. So you, as I said, you have HR people in the courses you teach. So from your interactions with them, why have they said they're even in the course at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. They're often in the courses because in their role as HR, they find themselves leading meetings of some kind or another. They get invited by a client partner group to come in and lead a team retreat or a team meeting. So they're saying, how do I do that? So that's a big reason why I find them in my courses. The other reason I find them in my courses is because they say, we have these really hard conversations we have to do, and they're hard and we don't know how to do them. And so they're looking for skills to do that better.
That sounds like sort of difficult conversations, crucial conversations, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Is facilitation useful for that?
Super useful. And it's the frameworks inside of facilitation that make it really useful for those conversations. And actually, when you take a look at things like the crucial conversation frameworks, I can see my facilitation structures in there as well. Good skills get used in different ways a lot.
Oh, that's a true statement. Okay. So we're talking about when facilitation skills come in handy. So that's two settings, sort of meetings and difficult conversations. What other circumstances do facilitation skills come in handy?
I love that question because the answer sometimes isn't obvious, but when you know how to facilitate, you're working through a model. And I think we're going to talk about it in a couple of minutes, but when you go through this model, you have a way of thinking about thinking. And so it's really helpful for listening to people when they're talking, because you can understand where they are in their own thoughts by kind of leaning back to your facilitation models. And so it allows you to support them differently. So as an example, if somebody's really upset and frustrated and having lots of obvious emotional state, you can say, okay, well, they're in that place in the model. What I'm not going to do is say, so what are some solutions for this? Because they're not ready for that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, wow, it sounds like you're really frustrated. Or, wow, it sounds like this has really been a trying time for you. What else do you want to talk about there? And so I'm going to support them in that stage that they're in. But I'm doing it because I'm listening through the lens of the facilitation model.
I could use that on my daughter.
It makes me think of the, it's not about the nail video.
Yeah.
And the partner keeps trying to talk about the nail and she's talking about how she's feeling.
Yeah. I think I find myself doing, this is off topic, but I find myself doing that a lot where I want to lead to the solutions because sitting in the discomfort with them is so uncomfortable for me too.
Yeah. My daughter's one of these people who needs to spend a lot of time cycling through what we call the reflective level or this emotional state. And she needs to work through that many times. And it's very hard to sit there in that with them because you're done with that. You've moved on. You're not invested in that.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get them to the solutions, but you just got to sit there with them. And so I can hear that in her. And
Mhm.
I can hear when she starts to shift to a different place in her thinking, and then I can support her in that place.
I hear that in a lot of the employees I talk to, actually,
Mhm.
like where they come and they want to be heard, they want you to hear them out. But yeah, anyways, there are sometimes more amenable in a professional setting to moving on to solutions, maybe before they've finished, as you call
Mhm.
it, the reflective phase. Anyway, can you break facilitation down into skills?
You sure can. There's a governing entity called the International Association of Facilitators, and they actually have a competency model. And so they identify 6 competencies, and I'll take you through the top 4. But
Sure.
the first one is what they call create collaborative relationships. So
Okay.
the skills in that for a facilitator are, really listening to your client, having really good questioning skills, being able to actively listening to the client to discover their circumstances, their need, what they're trying to accomplish, being able to, help them think so that you can get some really clear objectives. So that's kind of the first set of skills that we use. The second competency for IF is plan appropriate group process.
Mm.
And that's us. Okay, we've understood the client's need. We've understood what's going on with them. Now, what we need to do is build them some process. So in that, you start getting into, okay, what are good steps? What are good questions? What are good techniques? And so then the skills in there are really being able to um, understand and design process.
Hmm. Is that where the like group activities come in?
Totally. It's fun.
Yeah.
But using the right group activity.
Right.
There's, I often get asked by other facilitators, what do you do for icebreakers? And I said, well, I don't do icebreakers because I don't want to turn my clients into performing monkeys. But I will do something to open the session that is appropriate to the aims and intents of the session. And so it's choosing the right tools, choosing tools that further the situation or recognize that, the group's got a high degree of functionality. So there's a different kind of set of tools than you can use than when the group has got a low degree of functionality. If I got a group that's coming in frustrated, challenged, there's different tools I'm going to use. I'm going to do things differently. And so it's that development of your basket of tools, but knowing how to put process together. So that's really a second big bunch of skills. And then the third big bunch of skills from IAF is what they call create and sustain a participatory environment. So now we're in the room, and now I'm trying to create the conditions for the group to keep talking, to keep working with each other, to bridge their knowledge gaps or whatever we're trying to accomplish. And that's a lot of your active listening skills. That's a lot of your pacing. That's a lot of, knowing when to intervene or not intervene. The guiding that we do as facilitators, but not giving answers, but helping them to move on when they're ready to move on. So that's kind of the third big bucket of skills that IAF would identify. And then the fourth one is a guide to appropriate and useful outcomes. So that's IAF's fourth competency. And that's really knowing, when your groups get stuck, making sure you're getting to the outcomes you intended to get. You said at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to try and accomplish this. And so what am I doing to make sure we accomplish that? And so it's really making sure that you're taking them to that place. So often in a group conversation, your group goes sideways for some reason or another, and it's those things like, okay, let's come back on task. Right? Or, okay, that's not working. We need to do something different. And it's that ability to shift and dance and make sure they get to those outcomes. So those are really the 4 big buckets of skills.
I'm just thinking about that last skill. So often HR is told to, I'm just trying to think of an example about, let's just say safety compliance. This particular group is not that compliant with safety. So, we're supposed to bring them in the room and we're supposed to have this subtle conversation about safety. And they're just like sitting there rolling their eyes. How do you deal with stuff like that using those 4 skills?
That's a great question. And it goes to kind of that very first skill, which is the client relationship, which is really understanding what you're trying to do in those sessions. Because what we try and tease out is, are we in a situation where the group genuinely has some influence or some ability to affect a decision or the outcome, or is
Mm-hmm.
the decision already made and we're just trying to make sure that they toe the line? And being really clear about that. And either is okay, but just being really clear about what is the group's latitude inside of this meeting. So in case of the safety, this might be just a pure education, right? This is,
Mm-hmm.
we're throwing info at them. It's clear we're throwing info at them. We're asking them to learn how to work with that, but they're not making any decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes I get these strange conversations with a client that are like, well, we want them to get to the right answer. Is that decision already made? Because if it is, then let's be transparent about that and let's talk about what the right answer means versus pretending that they have some latitude or autonomy around getting to the answer. We call that in the facilitation world, we call that discipulation.
What?
Stipulation, the merge between manipulation and facilitation.
Uh-huh.
We're trying to avoid that.
So in that example, and the example you just ended off with, when a group comes in and you need to tell them that the decision is already made, but they're adamant that they want input, how do you handle that?
So the question that I would be having my client before I ever walk in that room is, do they have any latitude? And if the answer is no, then you're coming in with, this is it. This has been decided. So let's talk about how it affects you. Let's talk about how you're implementing it. Let's talk about how we keep current with the policy, let's say. But the decision is made, and you just have to be really transparent about that so people know the sandbox they're playing in when it started. And that when things go off, it often starts there, that there's a cross-setting right at the beginning between what the group can genuinely do and what they're told they can do.
Hey, business owners, executive directors, are people stresses or challenges getting in your way? Imagine managing your people issues smoothly, addressing, better yet, dealing with employee problems before they're ever a big problem, adapting to all the changes in employee rules, and doing all of this easily. I can deal with your HR challenges so they're resolved. With me, you'll get the right things done, build a strong team, and create a workplace where the right people want to be. Your business deserves to thrive without a lot of HR hassle. I'm here to help you make that happen. With my assistance, you can focus on business growth, supported by a strong team. Take a first step towards a better business today. Reach out and let's chat. Visit the hrhub.ca and let's begin transforming your people challenges. How do you set the right tone from the very beginning?
Yeah, that's a really important part of coming into the meeting. So, usually it's like this. There's some kind of a welcoming message. There's some kind of here's what we're here to accomplish. And you're very clear about that. Here's what our purpose of the meeting is. Here's what we're going to accomplish. Here's, what our agenda is. And here's our working agreements. And the working agreements sometimes seem really trite, but they're quite important actually. And so, the ones that I often use sound something like this. Everyone has wisdom. We need everyone's wisdom for the wisest result. There are no wrong answers. Everyone will hear and be heard, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So those are my 5 standard that I use, and they're part of a body of knowledge that I'm trained in. And we use those, and then we give some explanation about how those apply to the circumstances and why we're using them. And then we give people an opportunity to change them. What do you like or dislike about these? What should we change? What would make these better for us today? And so they can modify them. And in some cases, you would create them from scratch with a group, but often I introduce them. And then the next thing is really making sure you're getting all the voices in the room really quickly so that you're modeling those working assumptions so that you are setting the tone immediately. So whatever you do as soon as you open your meeting needs to reinforce this space for all voices. There's no wrong answers, right? And then you really want to make sure you're reinforcing those right from the get-go. And then what happens is the group starts to trust that that is in fact the case. And they will start to, relax into that, those conditions. But that's a pretty important part. And they seem very, administrative, but they're actually quite important. And I think I've learned that the hard way over the years, which is sort of doing a light touch on those. Because what happens if you get, halfway through and something's going off, you can go back to your working assumptions. Okay, hang on, guys, we said no wrong answers. So let's hear what this perspective is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And then often I'll hear my clients repeat them, like, no, there's no wrong answers. There's no wrong answers, right?
Yeah. And then they all laugh, ha, 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 but the point's been made.
But the point's been made.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really does help to set the conditions for a good conversation in a room.
What about that guy? We all know who that guy is. He sits in there and he sits back in his chair and say,
Oh, yeah, that guy
yeah,
on stage.
do with that guy.
You trust that he will participate when it's appropriate for him to participate. Yeah, I don't try and force anybody into the place. We have actually in meetings given people permission to leave. You don't have, if you're a hostage, you don't have to be here, right? We want you here
Mm-hmm.
because you want to be here. I rarely just anybody leave. But that guy, you trust that they will come into the conversation when they need to. But that's why we do a lot of small group, right? One-to-one kind of conversations, or groups of 3. That's why you do that. So create space for that person to become more comfortable and to share whatever's on their mind in a context that's less risky for them.
I think I know how you're going to answer this next question, but what is your favorite model for guiding your facilitation?
Yeah. I'm trained in a process or a body of knowledge called the technology of participation. And we have a core methodology we call ORID, ORID. And that absolutely grounds me for everything that I do, and it guides everything I do. And so the model says there's 4 levels of thinking. We need to move people through the 4 levels of thinking, that actually mirrors how our brains work. And so I'm always using that model. So, very briefly, the model says that there's an objective level of thinking, facts, data, what we see in the realm that comes in through our senses, right? Touch, sight, hearing. And then we have an internal response to that external data. So that's what we call the reflective level. That's our emotional response. That's lived experience. That's memories and associations. And then when we get through the R level, we go to what we call the I level, the interpretive level. And that's kind of that prefrontal cortex, thoughtfulness, connecting dots, rational thinking. And then when people, then we bring that thought process to a conclusion with what we call the decisional level. And it's a small d. So it's like that there's some kind of a resolution to the thought process. So those 4 levels of thinking, this objective, reflective, interpretive, decisional, guide me 100% of the time. And they've become so ingrained that it's kind of just how I think now. But what's super cool is we developed, the technology of participation model was developed in like the 60s, but we actually have the neuroscience that says, yeah, that's actually how thought works, right? It comes from the back of our head first and goes to the front of our head. And so that kind of limbic primitive brain senses things, decides whether we should be afraid before it goes to the front of our head for something, more, more rational, more thought out.
So you get the data, you have an emotional reaction to the data, then you process the data, and then you go to some sort of decision.
Yeah, you come to some kind
But you know what we so often do is we decide we're going to just skip the whole emotional stage because that's important.
100% true. 100% true. It's why I love the model, and I can go on and on and on. Like when I'm teaching, I just go, this is my soapbox. Let me get on my soapbox here.
Yeah.
But the R level, the reflective level, the corporate world broadly is kind of allergic to that level of thinking, right? It's like, let's just be professional here. Park your feelings at the door, right? It's business. Whatever we use to that level. The problem is if you don't deal with it, if you don't accept that it's part of the human thought process, it kind of just, if you leave it out in the room, it just kind of seeps back in a really kind of toxic way afterwards. So if you haven't dealt with it in the room, I guarantee you it will show up. It'll just show up in a way that's not going to be very helpful to you. So it's far more helpful to deal with that level in a conversation model than it is to pretend it doesn't exist. And so I was working with some engineers one day and they said, well, wouldn't it just be better if we just didn't have any emotions? And I'm like, perhaps, but it does keep us alive as a species. So it's kind of important.
Well, and it would, we can't reverse millions of years of
Right.
evolution, so we just better get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you deal, like, when you've got someone who is exhibiting emotions, and oftentimes in a workplace setting, that's going to be anger, because anger, you know, uh, anger, not disrespect isn't the word I'm looking for. Scorn for an idea, that's the outward manifestation of some emotions,
Correct.
right? And the only acceptable ones, we're not going to cry, we're not going to do, these are not acceptable. But how do you deal with emotions that are coming out? Like, what's the skills?
Yeah, in the facilitation model, what we actually do is we ask for the emotion. So we say, what are you worried about? We say, what are you excited about? What are you frustrated about? What are you confused about? And so we actually ask for a response to the emotion, because then you get really useful information. It's like, well, I'm concerned because we've tried this before and weren't successful. And then this happened. So I don't want to go down that path again. Okay, well, now I have a really useful set of information that we can work with, right? But if you just say, how do you feel? Well, I'm mad. It's not as helpful. So what we tend to do in the facilitation models, we actually ask for a response to the emotion so that we can get the data that's useful. Generally speaking, once the group has stated that kind of thing, they're ready to move on. And you can, because what happens is they start going to solutioning, or they start thinking about options, or you can hear them shift their thinking if you give them the space to do that. But if you skip that altogether, it's kind of ugly. You just can't move. If you can't get through the reflective level, you can't move. A group is stuck. And so you'll see them just spin and spin and spin.
Yeah. Have you ever gotten, done a facilitation where you just can't get through or it's a major struggle to get through all the emotions?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And we knew that going in, because we'd done our work going in, right? We'd done the preparation. So we knew we were coming into a hot group. We knew that they had conflict. We knew lots of stuff was going on. And we were not surprised to find ourselves mired in that. And, weren't surprised that you couldn't really get further than through that. And so we designed accordingly. I mean, you'll still kind of have a small I and a small d in that situation, but we designed accordingly, which was lots of time to, okay, we're going to spend time listening to everybody's perspectives. We're going to, we would call that a fishbowl. We're going to fishbowl it out today. We're going to, make sure that everybody gets to be heard. We're going to talk about what people hear, and we're going to find ways to process this, heightened emotional state that the group is sitting in. And that might be the objective of the session, is just really the group will understand, how they're all seeing this situation. And then they'll be ready to talk about solutions in a subsequent conversation.
I'm just thinking about all the things I've learned today.
Well, it's easy to talk about it when you're in the middle of it. It feels pretty uncomfortable. But, after 10 years of using this methodology, I have huge confidence that the model will support me. I'll trust the model, I'll trust the process, and it will support me through these difficult situations.
Okay. All right. I'm going to leave it there, because we're actually going to have a whole different conversation about the model and dive into that. So I encourage everybody out there to look for that. But to wrap it up, if there's somebody out there who goes, oh, this is what I've been looking for all my life, how can they develop their facilitation skills, and where can they find you?
Yeah. Well, they can develop their skills. The best way to develop your facilitation skills is training. What I have learned is people have an innate aptitude for it. Having the training will make all the difference for them. So, and what they'll learn in the training is, oh, I'm kind of doing that, but I wasn't doing that, right? So they know they've got some stuff going on, and they know they've got some gaps. So do the training. ICA-Associates.com in Canada offers training on the technology of participation, which I am a huge advocate of. So you can find training there. For myself, you can find me at ParsonsDialogue.com. And reach out to me, and I can guide you to any other place if you're looking for training or support as well.
Okay, I'll put links to all of that in the show notes. Well, thanks, Robin. I'm going to put some of that to use for sure. I am quite sure that I've been doing a lot of that, as you said at the end there, innately. but I would really have benefited from a course so that I could do it consciously, so that I could make real decisions in the moment rather than just reacting intuitively. However, we have reached the end of this episode. I think mediation skills is a related topic, and I did a couple episodes on that. Thanks for watching out there, and we'll see you next time.